the audio nice and clean. So a happy Tuesday night to everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. We do not have Bry Simpson tonight. Standing in for Bry, we have our friend Ruaraidh MacIntyre, who used to be Bry Simpson back before I guess there was a Bry Simpson, but Ruaraidh was the original Bry Simpson, and now he's a big wig out in Montreal, moving around chess pieces for Moet Hennessy across Canada. But we're thrilled to have him with us tonight. Ruaraidh's quite a character. He's a native Elik. His father still works at Ardbeg. He was one of the few people working at Ardbeg in the 1990s when it was just limping along. And obviously some incredible stories about Ardbeg from that. And so many of you may have met Ruaraidh in the past, either wherever you are in Canada or here in Calgary, at events he's done. And there were some great events over the years, Ruaraidh. There was that time they parked a tractor trailer bed out in front of the shop with the track tour on it. And all you were allowed to do was turn the engine on and rev it up.
I was actually incredibly scared while doing so. We were trying to get it started, and we went and bought very high octane fuel from the petrol station across the road. And I didn't have a license in Canada, and the police pulled up beside me while I was sitting on it. I just started it, and I was like, "Oh my God, they're going to ask for a license I don't have. I'm going to be arrested." And then they were like, "Open her up, eh?" So, and then we just gave it a bit of the revs, and they were like, "Yeah," and then drove off, and I turned it off and promptly got off the tractor and had a heart attack.
Yeah. But then later that same day, you had to actually drive it off the trailer in a park for a dinner that we were doing, and then put it back on afterwards.
I had to phone my father to be taught how to use a double clutch tractor, as he'd had to drive barrels around the Ardbeg distillery, so he was very well versed in tractor driving, bizarrely.
Well, anyway, some good times, but we're not here to talk about Ardbeg tonight. Obviously, we're here to talk about Glenmorangie. Before we do that, and before we get rolling, as always, I'd just like to highlight some of the other upcoming events that are coming your way. And I'm going to skip over a couple because I'm just going to mostly focus on the virtual ones, because I know we got a lot of people here. Well, we got at least all the way out to Ontario and some West Coast action here too. But we've got coming up early next month, we have Oded Weiss from Milk and Honey Distillery. We've got a cool tasting planned with Oded, including a couple of bottlings that have never come to Canada, and two ale cask whiskeys, of which only 6 bottles each have come to Canada, period. So that's kind of a cool lineup coming up. There's a bunch of Scotch Malt Whiskey Society tastings coming up, both in person. Edward Hour's sold out, so I won't bore you with that. This one, Kurt, we need to give some love to this, because I'm kind of surprised this one has not been taken off, as it were. 8 whiskeys for $45, including, 4 of Diageo's most famous distilleries in 2 different incarnations each.
Yeah, we like to throw punches at Diageo when we can, but Andrew and I have had this chat, and Harmony, I think I've said the same thing to her, and she's agreed. Diageo has some of the best distilleries in the world. So for us to not give them the time, I hate to say it, but we're missing out. So this range is going to be a killer range. I'm super excited to do it. It's great price for 8 whiskeys.
That's a bargain. I mean, I think an ounce of Lagavulin 16-year-old is about $45 now anyway. So it's really great value.
It is really great value, and it should be fun. But hopefully a few more people will sign up for it. And there will, Kurt, I guess we could add to this, there will be no punches pulled, because I at least will admit this, I have a complicated relationship with Diageo. I do love some of their brands, but the company drives me absolutely bananas. So
it's hard to turn a ship that big, buddy. We know it, right?
It is, but there will be some brutal honesty.
Sure will.
Both good and bad. What else? Maybe highlight 1 or 2 other quick things. Birthday Whiskey Festival. Sorry, that's sold out. There will be another whiskey festival in June, though. There's a bourbon tasting coming, Blinded by Bourbon, with Harmony and Evan later in May. And what else? There's at least one more. Oh, if you're in Calgary, this is a cool tasting. John Campbell, who was the distillery manager at Lafroig, he's now with Loch Lee Distillery. He's coming to Calgary. Never came to Calgary when he was working for Lafroig, but he's coming to Calgary in his capacity with Loch Lee, which is one of the cool new distilleries that's popped up. Possibly one of the most interesting in that no one knew it existed until they announced they had whiskey, which was kind of crazy. But there's been so many new distilleries opening in Scotland that I guess it would be easy for people to lose track of them. But that was kind of a cool one. Anyway, you guys know where to find our tastings on the website. We've had a few more stragglers join us, which is great. And if you are just joining us, Kurt put the order into the chat. Jeff has put it in there again because our friend Jeff in Victoria, he's our fact checker. And then he also does the things that we say we're going to do more quickly than we can. So thanks for that, Jeff. Our range tonight, we've got 8 whiskeys. I want to say a thank you, shout out to Charlton Hobbs, Moët Hennessy, who are the brand owners and importers for Glenmorangie and Ardbeg in Canada. They contributed to the cost of some of the product in tonight's tasting, which helped us keep the price down, which is always awesome, and gave us the opportunity to put not one, but 2 old Glenmorangies into this, which is always fun. So Ruari, thanks for joining us tonight.
Pleasure to be here, Andrew, to be brought out of the cupboard, which I'm generally cryogenically frozen and stored in. But it's good to be here. It's good to be able to taste some whiskies and to see people enjoy themselves with the fine malts of Glenmorangie.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we dig in, do you want to say any pretty words about Glenmorangie Distillery? I mean, I assume most people here must be familiar with it. It's an iconic whiskey brand, but can we distill that down into things they need to know? They absolutely must know about Glenmorangie.
Of course, I would be happy to be given the opportunity. Glenmorangie now celebrating its 180th anniversary this year, from 1843 to 2023. I only realized that this morning when I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it was 175th 5 years ago. But, you know, we've always been incredibly proud of being pioneering distillers, not always on purpose. I know that a lot of, you know, what people will call the brand speech has changed a lot in the past 10 years. But, you know, we've had Scotland's tallest stills for well over 100 years. Originally, you know, designed for producing gin. And it's funny because we have a whiskey tonight, the Taylor Forest, which has a connection towards gin, a botanical connection. We'll talk to that towards the finish. But the height of the stills in a gin would give a very kind of botanical flavor, but Glenmorangie really highlights the citrus and cereal notes that you pick up from the barley. So it tends to be a lighter whiskey. It's not one with any oily or heavier flavors, and so what we'll see tonight, a lot of cask finishes, a lot of these, you know, different woods and things being used, is because when you have such a malleable spirit, one that can take on and help to amplify different flavors with the casks, it really does give a huge opportunity for experimentation. Now, obviously, I worked at Ardbeg, as you mentioned, and you know, trying to get a cask finish onto an Ardbeg, you know, is like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You know, like we don't really do cask finishes at Ardbeg. It tends to be you put the whiskey in, leave it for 15 years and hope that it picks up something from the cask. It doesn't just taste like tar and an old rope. But at Glenmorangie, you know, a few years in a different cask can add a quite different complexion to the Scotch. And we'll see that the impact it's had in the first couple of whiskies and all through the range. And the driving force behind it all has been Dr. Bill Lumsden. He's been with the distillery now for well over 30 years. And he has had a hand in every single whiskey that we'll taste tonight. Some of them have been entirely his brainchild in terms of, you know, no one in the industry having ever done, you know, anything in that direction for Scotch production. You know, and one thing that I'm most proud of, I would say, for the distillery is that they're not afraid to try new things. In Scotch whiskey making, there can often be a certain amount of inertia where people want to stick with tried and tested. If it takes 10 years to see the results of an experiment, or 15 or 20, and you need to do maybe 50 casks to make it worthwhile, if it goes badly, what a waste of time and money. So people are like, well, people like our 10-year-old, let's keep making the 10-year-old. Let's not try cask finishes, because we might take a good product and make a bad product. So it's certainly to their credit that they're not afraid to try new things. And it has helped to push, whiskey making in, broader, more experimental directions. And I think without Glenmorangie, the whiskey industry would be a much more less exciting place. So that's my very small introductory boastful speech to start us off.
Oh, I was muted there for a second, Rory. I was going to add, you didn't even bring up the giraffes. But
No, I can. I mean, the giraffes will come in the fullness of time.
right, perfect.
If
Let's
I
not
had one
rush
in the
them
background here, pretend in this isn't a bed, but is in fact a fully grown adult African male giraffe behind us.
Perfect. All right. Well, without further ado, we should probably get into the first whiskey now. Kurt and Harmony, I know you guys have we moved on to the new Glenmo packaging yet, or are we still? So maybe remind Sean that we need to take new bottle shots, because we don't have the new packaging on our website, but we'll get there. We'll get to that. This is the last incarnation of packaging for the Lasanta, but I do have it here on the Glenmo site. So this is what she looks like now. So
luckily, it's purely a change of packaging. The whiskey tastes exactly the same, regardless of what bottle it comes in. So the old Lasanta and the new Lasanta, it's the same liquid. You're getting the same high quality product. Interestingly, though, the previous label before that, there was a difference in the liquid. When the Lasanta was first introduced, it was purely an Oloroso sherry. Sorry, I should say it was purely finished in Oloroso sherry. But today, what you're tasting in your glass has been finished in both Oloroso sherry and Pedro Jimenez sherry. So Oloroso sherry is a drier sherry, and you're going to get through more of those kind of raisin, sultana, and coffee notes there. With the Pedro Jimenez, which is much sweeter, you're going to get through a lot more of those kind of chocolatey and richer caramel notes coming through. It's a great example of a sherry cask. It's not something that we do a lot of. Of all the whiskies here tonight, I think only 3 of them have sherry cask in them. Well, for some distilleries, it will be, 100% of the range will be either finished in sherry or entirely aged in sherry. But quality is very important, and not all sherry casks are made equally. So for us, it's one where it's certainly very important to us, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all when it comes to whiskey making. So we start with the base of this product, which is effectively being the Glenmorangie original. We age 10 years in bourbon casks, first and second fill. And then we age for a minimum of 2 years in a mixture of Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez sherry. Now, when I say a minimum of 2 years, it's minimum. The age on the front of a whiskey for all of the whiskies that have an age tonight is always the youngest whiskey that's in there. It can be 2, 3, 4 years. For instance, a lot of it's to do with the size of the cask. Bigger cask will generally always have a longer maturation. You have a smaller surface area to volume of liquid, and a smaller cask will be a faster maturation. Likewise, if you've used a second fill bourbon cask, it won't as quickly pick up the flavor from the wood. From that bourbon cask, though, you will have the underlying Glenmorangie flavors here coming through. You will still have a little touch of vanilla that's come through from the bourbon cask. A certain kind of biscuity note that'll come through as well. And you'll often have on Glenmorangies a cereal element that can be a kind of nutty almondiness. It can be a little bit of coconut, or it can be a much more kind of malty, biscuity flavor. But that citrus and that fruitiness is very much enhanced by the height of the stills, as we mentioned, the height of a fully grown adult African male giraffe. And Glenmorangie is very proud to support giraffes. We do have giraffe packaging that we feature once a year. And on the longest day of the year, I believe it's June 21st, we also have a kind of special activation we do there too, because giraffes are very long as well.
So you're pro giraffe as opposed to anti-giraffe is what I'm hearing.
I'm not part of the anti-giraffe. I feel a kinship with the giraffes being tall and somewhat, gingery. Also 7 neck bones and 7 neck bones. So there's a lot more that we have in common than we have apart. Amazing. And also, I mean, a giraffe's coloring is basically just big freckles. So for a Scottish person like myself, it's, there's a lot that we have in common.
And when you're trying to outcompete another male for a female, do you go up to them and like smash your neck against their neck?
Scottish people are known for headbutting one another. So yes, it's very much in our DNA.
Amazing. Who knew? I haven't tried this in quite some time. And to be honest, it's better than the last time I remember having this. Like there's some nice sherry tones on here, lots of dark fruit, lots of chocolate. It's soft, it's very approachable. And the palate's good too. Kurt, Harmony, any thoughts?
I would agree. It's been a while for me as well. Can't remember the last time I had the 12, but it's really nice, well put together, very smooth. But I love the finish. It's got that like sweet fruit and chocolate going on, and like a little bit of spicy note there. It really comes together nice. I'm enjoying it.
The name is the name Lasanta is a nod to that kind of spicy element, and it means warmth or passion in Gaelic. There's not enough people that speak Gaelic to, I think, make it worthwhile to give the whiskey's Gaelic names, unfortunately. This one is often known as Lasanta, and by putting it in a red packaging, it only reinforces that Christmas association. But those spicy notes are very much what we consider one of the defining features. So, whether it's that kind of gingery, cinnamon, nutmeg, but warmth and warming, and very much it's something that we aim for with this Scotch.
Yeah, Rory, really quickly before Kurt says something about the profile, has there ever been a discussion about doing a special Santa edition of Lasanta? Like just full on owning it?
I mean, I think at some point you have to just embrace it. I would personally. I mean, Bill Lumsden is long enough in the tooth now that he certainly could do a convincing Santa Claus. But I'm not sure if we're there yet. But if I ever have my way, for sure we'll have a Christmas themed packaging.
And you could put a giraffe in a Santa outfit, like, try to keep it very Glenmorangie-esque. And it could be like fashion Santa. It doesn't have to be a fat Santa. I know Moe Hennessy's very image conscious, so it could be a svelte.
As you can tell by my 3-piece suit that I'm wearing this evening, we are as fashion centric as anyone else.
Kurt.
Yeah, I'm with you, Andrew. It's way, way, way better than I remember. This, plug your ears, Rue. This has always been one I kind of just was bored with and never found really exciting whiskey. You can tell it's kind of that newer style of sherry that's on top of this, kind of spicier, kind of like the new school Aberlour carry, as opposed to the old jammy style, a little more spice driven, and it really, really works. This is way better than I remember. Really dig it.
I think for a lot of people, when we did make those tweaks to the range, so when the Quinta Ruban went from being a 12-year-old to a 14-year-old, when the Lasanta went from being Oloroso only to Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez, people very much had their ideas of what the Lasanta was, and then when it changed not as many people as I would have liked would be like, hey, this is good, this is better. Instead, people were like, this is different, this is not what I want it to be. So I think, yes, with the distance of time, it does allow people to, I think, judge it on its own merits, and not have that previous idea of this is the Lasanta, and now it is. It's. I'll always say they're great scotches. I don't think we've put out a bad whiskey. Though I won't be drawn on that to any specifics. But in terms of all the whiskies that we have here tonight, everyone will have a different opinion on which is the best. And I think that's part of the charm of whiskey tasting. There's no one best whiskey. I know that very occasionally people will write books and say this is the best whiskey in the world. But it's always just one person's opinion, and everyone has their own one. They're all as valid as anyone else's. So I look forward to when we go through the speed round, and people are violently arguing over which is the best of the whiskies of the evening.
One good news for you there, Rory. I've got Evan working on creating a poll, so we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to do an actual vote, but I do want to see a vigorous public disagreement too, because that sounds fun. Anyway, Kurt, Harmony, your notes on that are bang on. I'm impressed by that. I like you, Kurt. It's a whiskey that for a lot of years I just kind of stopped paying attention to, but it's got a nice profile, and for the price point, it's like nice young shirt.
I think we can probably say this 4 times in this tasting, if only 46%. If this just had a little bit more weight on the palate, it's a real banger. Like the flavor profile really works for me. This would be like a daily crusher for me.
We know we see where you're coming from with that comment, Kurt, and I think the Lasanta is still in the halfway house between being very introductory. Not very introductory, but more of an introductory whiskey. We have the original at 40%, Lasanta at 43%, and then we move more full-bodied into 46 with the other extra matured range.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, Ruth. That's just me as a whiskey geek saying like that would take it up to that echelon for me. I totally understand the market positioning. We get it. We get kind of our knickers in a twist when we have those really, really thin whiskeys, but we do get it. We do get not everybody's us. And in fact, we are by far the fraction minority. So we get it. We just have our druthers. We really love to see this one a little bit weightier.
Of course. And I have similarly strong opinions. There is a 43% edition of the original. I think that they make for South Africa. Which I've always wanted to try, but we don't get we don't get here whatsoever. It's a 40% for Canada.
Maybe someday. Shall we on to the Nectar D'Or?
Excellent, for sure. So the next Scotch has quite an interesting history. It kind of typifies that sense of experimentation that I was mentioning earlier on, where Glenmorangie have always looked to kind of push the boundaries, and the Sauterne finish, as it was known once upon a time, was part of a series of extra matured scotches or finished scotches. And in the past we've had Madeira, Sauterne, Burgundy, Port, obviously, and it's one that was started by the distillery a long time ago. And there's still disagreement to this day whether it was Balvenie or whether it was Glenmorangie that did the first extra matured whiskey. I think the take from Glenmorangie is that we were the first to put one into a barrel, and Balvenie were the first to release. So 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. I mean, I know that the Scots, we claim that we invented the television, but it was something akin to like just a series of tubes rotating in a circle. I mean, the real TV was invented by Philo Farnsworth. But being first appears to be important for some reason. But The Nectar D'Or, I suppose, is the culmination of all those years of extra maturation, of experimentation. We're still the most widely available of a Sauterne finished Scotch. The only one I can really think of that's, I suppose, as old, maybe the Tullibardine Sauterne finish. But Glenmorangie uses by far the vast majority of what's available of Sauterne casks every year. For anyone who is unaware, Sauterne is a sweet dessert wine. There's not a huge amount of it produced every year. The conditions for producing Sauterne are very specific. And very much anything that's available of Sauterne cask is of a high enough quality, Glenmorangie will purchase and use for the Nectar D'Or. The biggest break, actually, or bottleneck, as it were, for us in terms of increasing our production for the Nectar D'Or is the supply of Sauterne casks. We can only produce as much Nectar D'Or as we can get Sauterne casks to age in. So it has been a bit of an issue of the last couple of years. Now, with that in mind, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that the Nectar D'Or went from saying Nectar D'Or 12 years old to Nectar D'Or 12 years old to then just saying Nectar D'Or. And at the moment, it is technically a non-age statement Scotch, partially to do with the difficulty that we have had in terms of getting Sauterne casks. It's something that we are working on the back end. I can't really say any more than that for the moment. But the Nectar D'Or, don't have any worries, about it. We're always going to be delivering that Sauterne flavor to Glenmorangie's fans. So the name itself, Nectar, hinting to the delicious, sweet, almost syrupy goodness that we have there, and D'Or being both gold in French and Gaelic. Now, Gaelic does have a lot of overlap with French. I can say this as someone who learned Gaelic as a child and then learned French as an adult. But there's a lot more in common between French and Gaelic than there is between English and Gaelic, and partly because Gaelic came from the Breton region of France and went through Ireland and Wales and so on before getting up to Scotland. So we do have some roots, some similar roots there. Now, for the Nectar D'Or, much like the Lasanta, we're starting with a bourbon cask, aging for a minimum of 10 years. And then here we're aging not for a specific period of time, because, as I said, it's a non-age statement. But you can imagine that it's similar to, say 2 years or around about that region. Some will be less than 2 years, some will be more than 2 years. But we can't we could legally put an age on there, but it would be less than 12 years, as you can imagine. But in terms of flavor, you will notice that the quality of the product has remained undiminished. It still has beautifully rich, honeyed nose. The citrus on the Nectar D'Or quite often presents itself as lemon. There's a creaminess to it. That coconut that I mentioned, you can also pick up there too. On the palate, it's a little bit, I won't say sharper, but you get more of that kind of European oak coming through that French oak. And you get, a little bit of, not quite the same spice that you picked up on the Lasanta, because there's not that kind of dark chocolate note there, but you will have maybe a touch of white chocolate, cream, a little touch of ginger coming through again. But it's almost, if you can have a dessert wine, I would almost say this is a dessert Scotch, like as opposed to having a bowl of ice cream, for instance, after a big T-bone steak. Instead, it could be a little dram of the Glenmorangie Nectar D'Or. It's incredibly popular here in my home province of Quebec. It almost outsells the original here. It outsells the original in terms of value. It's incredibly popular, but I think here, obviously, Sauterne is also a big seller. I know, Andrew, I'm sure you sell a lot of Sauterne at Kensington Wine Market, but it's not as widely known in other parts of Canada when you talk about Sauterne wines. But yeah, generally when we do tastings of the extra mature range, it's seen as, you know, pretty much up there in terms of quality. It's a beautiful, beautiful dram.
Rory, have you guys ever thought of doing a bone marrow luge with Nectar D'Or?
I mean, I've done bone marrow luge. I'm not sure with the Nectar D'Or. I have done with Glenmorangie original, I believe, in the past.
Oh, well, I mean, next time I'm in Montreal, let's do it. Let's go out. We'll find it. We'll find some good bone marrow, and we'll do a little Nectar D'Or bone marrow luge.
I will take you to my favorite restaurant, which is L'Express on Saint Denis Street, where they do a great bone marrow, and I will convince them to do a bone marrow luge.
All right,
for us.
It's a date.
For anyone unfamiliar with this type of decadence, it's the sort of thing where you do have to place a dishcloth over your head so that God cannot see how decadent you're being with the consumption of whiskey this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just hope that someone doesn't post a video of it on social media. But anyway, Rory, should we be reading into the fact that the Nectar D'Or seems to be the only whiskey in the range that has not been revamped, or is that just?
I wouldn't read anything into that, Andrew. You know, speaking officially here, the Nectar D'Or may see some changes to the packaging, but for the time being, no changes are expected. But obviously, we leave it open in terms of, you know, maybe the Nectar D'Or deserves a fancier box like it had in the past. If you remember, we used to have that lovely kind of coffret type box that opened on a hinge. So, you know, we're just looking at all different possibilities here at the moment.
Those boxes were treacherous. They sometimes just flew open when people
and the
were
whiskey would fall out onto the floor. That was an issue.
Yeah. All right, Harmony, thoughts on the Nectar D'Or?
It's spicier than I remember. Like it's like ginger spice through and through. But I like the palate has those like burnt brown sugar notes that I enjoy, and lots of caramel, and then of course the sauternes that I do remember comes through on the finish, so that nice kind of sweeter palate rounds out really nice. I enjoyed just looking at the glass while drinking this when the legs are really thick and slow to come down, which was just enjoyable. Just to know that it was this like big kind of oily whiskey for something that's known to be like this light dessert whiskey. So I enjoyed that.
Thanks, Harmony. Kurt, thoughts?
I like the Lasanta.
Yeah, there was a bit of a little private chat going on here with some suspicion that maybe the nose might have a little bit of sulfur on it. I don't know that I get sulfur on the nose. The nose is not my favorite though. It's very wine cask, like kind of classic wine cask, but I do like the palate. The palate's got some nice white fruits. It's sweet, it's spicy. But it's an odd one for me because I used to prefer the Nectar D'Or to the Lasanta, and at least right now I'm preferring the Lasanta to the Nectar D'Or. So
100%. I've always been like partial to just the standard Glenmorangie 10. I like that flavor profile. It's a really, really sweet spirit, but it's a really, really sexy base spirit too. It's amenable to a lot of finishes. Nectar D'Or, like you, Andrew, that was the one I kind of always pushed people towards. But I'll be kind of nudging him towards the Lasanta in the future. I really like that one.
Yeah. And I wonder if, like, I mean, Kurt, what you're getting is sulfur. I'm wondering if it's just a bit of like a kind of a sort of musty, winey funk, because that's for me what I really get on the nose. And I mean, everyone knows Sauternes' favorite companion is blue cheese. So I kind of like it on the palate, but I can sort of see the nose is not wowing me right off the bat tonight. So
I do get a little bit of a match sticky note on the mid palate too. So. Drew, how many casks do you think go into a vatting of an expression like this?
Nectar D'Or, I mean, generally the minimum, we do bottle a few times a year. I think the Nectar D'Or we bottle about 4 times a year, but in terms of each of the runs, you probably have up to about 200 casks. It's interesting. My younger sister used to be involved in the whiskey creation team, and every single cask is tasted and it has to pass. I have to get a score of at least 75% on 4 separate categories reflecting on flavor. And if it doesn't, either it goes back for additional aging, or if it's not good enough to have Glenmorangie's name on it, it gets sold to blenders and teaspooned and so on. But it's one where, if it's really bad, it'll just get dumped. But it's one where that side of things is really quite interesting. And I'm always amazed at how consistent they can get between batches. You will always have some variation, depending on when it's been bottled, and you can have, to Andrew's point where he mentioned it had quite a pronounced wine impact, and certainly from Sauternes, where it is almost like a concentrated wine, you are going to pick up more of that, but also to your own, Kurt, when it comes to impact of casks and so on. You can have, I wouldn't say off notes, but you can have certain, funkier flavors coming through, and because the batch runs tend to be smaller, it can be, more pronounced in certain batches. It's not quite single cask or anything along those lines, but yeah, you will see variation even from year to year, depending on, what the conditions were like for production in Sauternes.
So what I heard is that you need to buy a second bottle just a little further along the line to be able to compare batches.
You can certainly, one of the great things about Scotch is once the cork's on there, it's a time capsule. So it's always great to be able to pick up, various different years of whiskies and taste them and see how it does vary and change.
Once the cork's on, it's a time capsule. Great line. I like that. Very cool. And a few more people turned their cameras on. That's awesome. It's nice talking to faces, not gray boxes. So it's good to see you guys.
Well, I think we're on to the oldest whiskey in our lineup tonight now.
I've arranged these kind of based on flavor. I'm trying to go from lighter to heavier. I don't want to pinball between flavor profiles just based on the value of the Scotch. So the Grand Vintage 1996 is part of a series of Scotches. We started with the Grand Vintage. Chronologically, we started actually with 1990, and then introduced in 1989. But we've had whiskies from 1989 all the way through until 1987. It was the last, and we'll have the 1997 tonight. At least for now, the Grand Vintage release is on pause. We had something interesting from different years, and the 1996, as is mentioned on the screen here, has been done entirely in first build American oak. So Glenmorangie, as I mentioned, has been a bit of a pioneer in different aspects of whiskey making. While we have been very big in terms of extra maturation, we have also been very big in terms of primary maturation. So in the early 90s, Dr. Bill Lumsden, did his best lumberjack impression, much like myself. Went to the Ozark Mountains in Missouri, and kind of got to work with the forestry people there, and was looking at specific patches of land where we wanted trees to be felled, made into casks that would be seasoned to our specific standards, so air dried as opposed to being kilned, and then actually built to specifications from Dr. Bill, slightly smaller than a kind of standard 200-liter bourbon barrel. So in terms of the impact that has on the whiskey, it might seem as if you're just like nitpicking and like what impact is it going to have, but the maturation is a chemical process. It happens on a microscopic level. So if you can change the surface of the wood on a microscopic level through something like air drying as opposed to kilning, where you're allowing the flavors to develop in a much more positive sense and allowing any maybe harsher or bitter notes to kind of leach away, then it should, in theory, give you a much better tasting Scotch. Now, once upon a time, we released a whiskey a long time ago called the Lasanta. Now, some people, or one person in particular, thought that this was the best whiskey in the world. That person was named.
This is someone, yeah, we don't need to speak this person's name.
We don't need to mention their name. It was, of course, Voldemort. But in terms of the Scotch, and I remember actually being in Alberta, and this was maybe 7 years ago. I remember going into a whiskey store and being like, we have this new whiskey, it's the Glenmorangie Lasanta, it's this delicious 19-year-old, and like it's been done entirely and toasted American oak. It was very, very lightly toasted. And so many places were like, nah, we're okay, like 19, it's only in bourbon, 19 years old, nah, we're fine. And then I think 6 months later, it was given us awards, and then every account I'd ever spoken to was like, we get some of that Lasanta. And we're like, no, it's sold out now. But
we sold it all.
Exactly.
There wasn't any left by the time he who shall not be named said his words or wrote his words down.
But this particular whiskey, the Grand Vintage 1996, it's obviously not the same as the Lasanta. We had a bit more time in terms of experimenting with using first fill oak and with using these particular casks ourselves. I mean, that was the Lasanta was virgin oak. This is first fill oak. But in terms of the flavor, I have not tasted the 1996, and I don't even have a dram in front of me. For everyone who is unaware of me being parachuted in for this tasting, Bry Simpson was supposed to be hosting you all this evening, and he's unfortunately unavailable. But I stepped in at the last moment. I can read the tasting notes. Unfortunately, I don't get to taste the Scotch though. But I would imagine.
Ruaraidh, we've got a couple of kits left over. Tomorrow morning, I'll make sure that we get one packed up for you, and we'll make sure you get to try the 96 and the 97. So we'll remedy this.
I felt that 18 hours was maybe too short a turnaround time to get
probably would have been tough. Yeah. But you could read them out, but I think we've also got 3 noses and palates here that are happy to chime in on it. I'll just start off like this is kind of everything I want from 20-year-old Glenmorangie. This is clean bourbon cask, very fruity, creamy, some nice soft floral tones. It's starting to get tropical. It's decadent. Yeah, I wish you would do this all the time, but that's just me. Harmony's nodding. Like, Harmony, what would you like to add?
Well, you know me, I prefer my Scotch untouched by sherry, especially as it gets older. I just think there's something magical about just a nice American oak or European oak cask. I love the juiciness of this. Yeah, it's silky, creamy. The palate, like, it lingers with these like bright fruit notes and vanilla. There's a little bit of floral, but it's not too much. It's perfect. I'm loving it.
Kurt?
Yeah, you guys had to know this is right in my wheelhouse. I think if I nosed or tasted this blindly, I would guess Glentockers, which is, in my opinion, a huge compliment because that's one of my favorite distilleries going. I love it. It's kind of juicy fruit, it's pineapple, and I mean juicy fruit in the gum. It's pineapple, it's orange, it's vanilla, it's a little bit of Jolly Ranchers meets wine gum on the palate, like a nice kind of almost tropical that I think Andrew's moving into, and you get into those slightly sour notes, which I really, really dig. This is a brilliant whiskey. Love it.
Yeah, it also fits in nicely with the you know, some of the past releases too, which, and I'll admit I was skeptical about some of them. And you might remember, or one of you guys might be able to correct me, but I think it was the 93 that was bourbon and wine cask. And I was just like, not ready for it, not a wine cask guy. And I remember the first time I tried it and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. But I still prefer this style because it's just, it allows more of that oxidative distillate fruit character to come through. And yeah, it's very, very pretty.
Well, thank you everyone for the kind words. I was going to ask, I know that we tasted this a long time ago now, Andrew. I did bring along a bottle of the Glenmorangie 19-year-old once upon a time. It's a duty-free exclusive, but it's also aged exclusively in bourbon cask. They're not all first fill, but that one did tend to have more of a note of eucalyptus, a little bit more menthol. I will talk a little bit about Glenmorangie special water when we come to the Quinta Ruban. But do you have any of that more herbal elements here, or is it much more on the kind of barley-led citrus and lighter, you know, fruitier notes?
I think it's barley, oxidative fruits, and like classic American oak, vanilla, honey, white fruits, and soft spices. Like that's the profile that I'm getting here. And I think that's why Kurt's saying it was reminding him of Glentalkers, because when we often see 20-something Glentalkers, it's usually first or second fill bourbon, and you're getting mostly distillate, but you're getting a little bit of that like nice, soft, velvety American oak coming into.
Well, I am jealous. The 19-year-old was always a favorite of mine. I'm not sure. Pardon?
No, you go ahead. You were finishing saying something.
I mean, I was just going to ask if at any point I should bring up the playoffs and hockey and so on, but I'm assuming everyone here is a Flames fan, so you don't want to hear about
sore
hockey.
spot.
Oh,
Right
I see that. I mean, I'm currently looking at a box score of the Leafs losing to the Lightning, which is, as a Habs fan, cheering me up no end. So it's at least one high point for the evening.
I mean, hockey starts to become very political, so I'm not sure I should express how I feel about the Leafs. So I won't. And the Oilers, I mean, part of me wants them to win because they're probably the Canadian team with the best chance, and it's been way too long since the Canadian team's won. But like, I don't think I can handle the way my in-laws are gonna react, let alone the other half of the province. So we'll see. I think I'm gonna tune it out. Hockey season's over for me. I'm waiting. I'm thinking about next year already.
I mean, I'm a Habs fan, so the hockey season for me has been over pretty much since October. But I'm hoping for a good draft, and hopefully the tanking was worth it to get Connor Bedard. But I'll leave the hockey chat at the door now, and get back to the Scotch.
Yeah. So what do we have next? Is it the Quinta next, or where are we off to next? 18-year.
The 18-year-old. It's the 18-year-old. I'm taking it as down a very meandering path of flavor here. The 18-year-old is a personal favorite of mine. I've actually described it as a whiskey you can drink with your nose. I don't recommend drinking it with your nose. It's more a turn of speech, but it's very much a beautifully perfumed. Like the nose of this Scotch is still to this day probably my favorite of any Glenmorangie. You know, very sweet, honeyed, white fruit, pear, apple. You do get some of that richness of chocolate coming through, milk chocolate, but the nose is just waves of fruit and sweetness. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, this whiskey has a mildly complicated aging. We age a portion of it entirely in bourbon cask, so about 40% is aged 100% in bourbon. 60% is aged 15 years in a bourbon cask, and then 3 extra years in Oloroso sherry cask. And then everything gets married together at the end before bottling. Now, I think a lot of that white fruit flavor is coming from the bourbon cask. It has, I suppose, some of the similarities maybe with the 1996, and definitely a Glenmorangie that's had a long time in American oak does really help to amplify these flavors that we're picking up from the spirit, you know, and coming from those kind of lighter flavors from the height of the stills. But it's absolutely beautiful, beautiful dram. The price has been relatively fixed for the past decade. I've done my best to keep it at an approachable price. That may not always be the case, but certainly for the time being, if you enjoy it, please do buy a bottle from Andrew specifically, or the Kensington Wine Market. Basically, it doesn't need to be Andrew that sells it to you, but it is a huge favorite of mine, and it's one that I always have in the house, even for people who have never had a whiskey before, or people who have had a whiskey before and say, "Oh no, I don't like Scotch. It's so rough." Ugh. The 18-year-old is just beautiful. Now, the palate is something it's a little bit different. This is actually where it gets quite interesting, because this is a whiskey of two halves. So in terms of the palate, you very much pick up the European oak here. So it's a little bit more intense. On the palate, you get more of kind of like a darker chocolate coming through. You very much get the age. You know, you get 18 years of wood. And so it's much richer, and it's quite interesting. The palate, I'm not saying it's quite like the Signet, for instance. You know, it's nowhere near as intense as that, but it does have a real richness to it. You know, much more pronounced than, say, the Quinta Ruban. Now, partly this could be just a contrast between how light the nose is and then how much more intense it makes the palate seem. But I do love that kind of dichotomy between, you know, what you have on the nose and what you have on the palate.
Mm-hmm. Kurt, your thoughts?
This is an absolute cracker batch. One of the best Glenmo 18s I've had. This one's really good. Again, it's Glentalkers-ish to me. Wish it was a little weightier on the palate, but the flavors are spot on.
I almost thought about preempting you too. I was going to say, if only slightly,
a little bit.
ABV.
But you know what?
I mean,
sometimes you just got to suck it up. You can't sacrifice being able to drink a great flavor profile just because it doesn't have the weight on the palate you want. Like, this is a brilliant whiskey.
I'd love to see this at cask strength, to be totally honest.
Oh man.
Now
you're just getting greedy.
Ruaraidh, you know, I know it won't happen, but let's just say, like, if a cask strength 18-year-old were to find its way to Alberta, we would be pretty jacked about that. So
if you add a dropper of Everclear into your glass, you're basically bringing it back up to cask strength. This obviously is a joke. Please do not take me at face value. Whiskey making is not like this at all.
Yeah, no. Harmony, thoughts?
I think it's beautiful. I love the finish is just like bright red apples, and it's great. Yeah,
it's got a nice balance to it. I mean, that slight sherry influence has a surprising amount of impact in it, but without being dominant. Yeah, it's a pretty dram. It's elegant. Ruaraidh, do they still make that 19-year-old duty-free Glenmo?
We still do. It's still available. I will admit, Canadian duty-free is not as much of a bargain as other countries, partly because of the monopoly system that we have here. But there are a few stores that stock it. I can't force them to buy it, but you know, we have convinced some to take on.
Interesting. Cool. Well, if you're ever sitting on stock and need to find another outlet for it that's not duty free, we're always game.
Well, knowing how this year's going, Andrew, who knows what's going to.
Well, yeah. Ruaraidh,
we'll take this one offline.
Yeah, but it's good. I mean, yeah, we've all, anyone who's working in retail can't be blind to the fact that things are not going the way they were a couple of years ago, but that's all right. It's a cycle. You got to ride it out. So
for sure.
Yeah, Kurt, I've had the Glenmore 18 before too. This is the best batch of this I think I can remember. So, in a time when the industry, a lot of the big guys in the industry are kind of dumbing things down, the quality of oak they seem to be using is not getting better. I'm impressed that two of the releases in this lineup are as good or better than I've ever had from those expressions. So
Definitely better than I've had. So very cool.
I think one, not again, I am here to big up Glenmorangie, so I mean, I'll not apologize too much for whenever I toot our horn, but I think one thing that very much operates in Glenmorangie's favor is that we haven't made any huge changes to our production. We haven't doubled the size of the distillery. We've not built a new distillery off-site and then moved all of our production there or anything along those lines. We make now 7 million liters a year, compared to most of the other like big distilleries. We're a dwarf. Our annual output is much smaller than the other, Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Macallan, and so on. And what it allows us is to have a much greater choice on the quality of our wood. If you double the volume of whiskey that you're producing, you suddenly have to have double the number of casks. And you're going to be much less choosy in terms of what you're using. The spirit has to go somewhere, it has to go into wood. So by having a much more limited production, it allows us to be a little bit more picky. And it means you can keep the quality high. Even the increase that we have made from 6 million to 7 million, that 1 million liters is focused on our new experimental distillery that we call the Lighthouse. So we will eventually get to the Signet, but one of the issues on making the Signet was that we effectively shut down the distillery for a week to get ready to make the Signet. And then we had to shut the distillery again to clean all the lines to get all the chocolate malt out, and then go back to making our regular batch of whiskey. So by kind of siloing off the production into a slightly separate while still being on site production, it allowed us to be able to continue to make our kind of light spirit the fullness of the year. So yeah, I'm pleased that we're not making it on an industrial scale or anything along those lines. You come to the distillery and you'll still see, there we are. Thank you for the beautiful image. I was going to say, you'll still see everything in these old, what looks almost like barnyard type building, these old stone walls and so on. With the exception of our very tall glass building in the middle of the yard.
it's a classy edition, Rory. It's a classy edition.
The height of 3 fully grown male giraffes stacked on top of one another. If such a thing were to be done.
There would be a sight to be seen for sure. All right, we're on to the Glenmorangie Grand Vintage Malt 1997 now. Is our next malt up. So I'll pull this up here. Rory, what can you tell us about this one? Other than the fact that you haven't tasted it, which we're going to remedy.
This one has the most complicated aging of any of the whiskies tonight. I had to really dig into finding exactly how it was produced, because what you'll see focused on there is that it's had bourbon barrels and Chateau Montrose Bordeaux. But after doing some intense research, I have found out that some of the whiskey was also aged in Oloroso sherry. So you will have some sherry impact coming through there as well. I couldn't get exact information with respect to the aging. It's not always available even for people within the company. There are still some secrets that Dr. Bill likes to keep to himself. And when it comes to the runs of these sorts of bottles at the Grand Vintage, I mean, you're literally talking about a few thousand bottles. It's in terms of casks, you maybe have about 10 casks and that's it. Like, it's not a huge production. So Dr. Bell is known for being a bit of a wine connoisseur. I do think that part of his reason that he likes to age whiskies in wine casks is it gives him an excuse to go to France, taste huge amounts of wine, and then say, this will make an excellent finish for Glenmorangie. Or perhaps he's just buying up casks of wine full and then, you know, emptying them himself and using said casks for whiskey production. But certainly his nose goes beyond just appreciation of Scotch. You know, he's a huge fan of wines. And it's very much been to the benefit of Glenmorangie and allowing us to, you know, have these experiments in all sorts of different casks. I'm sure if in 1997 you were, you know, telling people, oh yeah, we've just bought these Bordeaux casks to age Glenmorangie in, you know, people would be like, Bordeaux, at least in Scotland, because, you know, we're not known for our wine drinking. You know, I think in 1997 the majority of wine in Scotland was classified as either red or white, with no further information available beyond that. But I'll stop doing a disservice to my fellow countrymen. Possibly it's growing up on Islay, we didn't have a huge selection of wine available because it was sold in the local supermarket, so it was not wasn't to the level that Kensington Wine Market makes available for the fine patrons of Calgary.
Yeah, well, prior to the existence of shops like mine in Alberta, Albertans had a disproportionately large exposure to German Rieslings because the buyer for the Alberta government liquor stores apparently really liked Riesling, and they sent him to Germany for like a 2-week trip every year, paid for by presumably the winemakers of the Mosel Valley or whatever. So yeah, it happens. Harmy, I'll start with you this time. What are your thoughts on this one?
I like it. It's got more chocolate on it than I was anticipating, and I imagine that's the wine cask taking over there. Drier fruits, more chocolate. It's less spicy, a little bit softer. I think if I had to compare the two, I prefer like the juiciness of the 96 to the 97, but it's still a really pretty whiskey, and I just want to eat like a big piece of chocolate cake with this.
Yeah, I get like, now that you mention that, it's got this like Black Forest cake.
Yeah,
You got the chocolate, you got that
cherry
chantilly cream or whatever, and maybe some sour cherry or something in there too.
totally.
Your thoughts?
I can't get past this massive blueberry note all over the nose for me. And then there's like that chocolatey. Do you know those McCain freezer chocolate cakes?
Deep and delicious, baby.
Yeah.
Deep and delicious.
Yeah. It's kind of got that kind of chocolatey tone to me. It's a cool whiskey. I'm with Harmony. I prefer the 96. This is the more luscious, kind of bigger, richer, dirtier version. I kind of prefer the more austere, but I'm happy to drink both. Eddie's right?
It's got similarities to the 93, the Grand Vintage 93, but not quite as rich. I think that one was a much richer, rounder, fuller expression. The one thing I will say about this is it doesn't come across wine cask to me. It comes across more like refill sherry. And I think that's maybe a testament to how the casks were handled here. They were handled well. I'm not getting that musty, winey note from it. It's more, I could very easily confuse this with having been finished in just a refill sherry cask of some kind. But I agree with you guys. I love how clean and precise the 96 is, but I still think this is a nice whiskey.
I wanted to ask, I know it has no indication on quality or flavor, but how is the color on this? I always feel like the red wine casks are.
Yeah,
I thought it would have been a bit darker, but.
Well, I was actually the first thing I noticed when I picked up the 97. I was like, oh, this is darker. And you may have seen me on camera holding my glasses, like comparing them in the light. It's definitely noticeable. And I would like to point out that there are people in the chat disagreeing that they prefer this 97 to the 96. So
Adam and the knitters both prefer the 97. So
I'm seeing some head nods in the cameras here preferring the 97. as well. So it's great. I mean, there's a scotch for everyone in the Glenmoe line.
And I'm with Charlene. I want a deep and delicious cake now. That's taking me back to university.
Yeah.
I had a buddy who he'd be like, we would go out drinking, and then he'd be on our way home, he'd be like, we should pick up a deep and delicious. And then we would just sit up until whenever eating McCain Deep and Delicious.
They're so greasy, dude. They're so gross. They're so greasy. Like, you cut a piece, then try washing your knife afterwards. It's so greasy. And
Kurt, I'd probably been out drinking for 8 to 12 hours. Like, at that
Grease is
point, I didn't
necessary.
care. I was just enjoying some cake. So,
so gross.
Yeah,
And
I
then
agree.
companionship, presumably.
Greasy is
that's
correct.
amazing.
Growing up, we would order the like family dinner at like KFC, and it would come with that deep and delicious cake. And that's how I have my memories attached. So greasy is right, Kurt, and that's how it should be.
Yeah. So Ruaraidh, new plan. Glenmorangie, Lasanta, bone marrow luge, and then McCain Deep and Delicious cake for dessert.
I mean, the official chef's pairing is with McCain Deep and Delicious for this. So.
All right. Well, there you have it. I love it when there's dissent, when there's not agreement. So that's brilliant. All right. Finally, we're on to the Quinta Ruban.
Yeah, the home stretch. So I'm going to talk about Glenmorangie's water. Many distilleries talk about their water, and by and large, the water source is completely meaningless. The great thing about having a water source is if it's plentiful, because generally we use the water for cooling down the scotch. So you want to have enough water that when it comes to distillation, you can quickly condense your vapors and end up with something of a good, clean distillate. But here, what I will say for the water that we're using to make Glenmorangie, it's a very hard water. Most distillers will not use a hard water. They're not looking for anything that has huge amounts of mineral content, because you're going to be boiling it near the end of the process. So you'll build up huge amounts of limescale and so on within the stills. But this minerality will not lead to flavors of mineral. And I do want to make that clear. But during the fermentation process, the minerality will help to, or I should say the compounds that those minerals comprise will help to lead to specific esters being generated during the fermentation process. And then when we get to the distillation, further complex flavor compounds are developed. And one of the specific flavors, which you can pick up on the Quinta Ruban, is menthol. So menthol is a specific ester. And for us, it's helping to be developed because of the minerality that we have in the water of Glenmorangie. So it's very much towards the finish, almost as you're kind of, tasting what's been left behind on the palate, but you can pick up that little touch of mint. You don't get on every batch, but when I was speaking earlier on to some of the herbal notes that the 19-year-old had, eucalyptus and things like that, menthol note is all of these herbal notes are coming from the minerality of our water source. So that's the Tarlogi Springs. If you go to the distillery, it is incredibly disappointing to see. It just looks like a pond with a kind of sandy bottom. It's maybe 3 feet deep, and you look down into the pond, and you can just see the kind of sand kind of pitter-pattering around as the water is kind of rising up from the earth, and that's the source for the distillery. I always find natural springs quite interesting, because water is just pouring out of the ground. It's kind of cool. But in the area, the limestone and the sandstone are very soft. So rain 200 years ago becomes whiskey. Interestingly, more than likely, rain 180 years ago is now being produced and turned into not produced, but being turned into Glenmorangie. So we've gone full circle from when the distillery was first started. But the Quinta Ruban, to tell you more about the product, it's aged for a minimum of 10 years in bourbon cask, first fill and second fill bourbon cask, and then it's aged in ruby port types. I'm sure Andrew has explained numerous times about the different shapes and sizes of barrels and volumes and so on, but port pipes do tend to be quite enormous. They're very long, and they always look odd in the warehouses because everything else has a kind of almost like set height, and then the pipes are just this hugely long things. They just look silly. But in terms of what it brings through here, you all have a much more dark chocolate note coming through on the nose. I find there's a kind of black and red fruit jamminess that you get on the Quinta Ruban. On the palate, it's more intense than the Lasanta. You have more of that richness there, more of that kind of dark. I won't say bitter, but maybe slightly more kind of astringent notes coming through as well. It's a very earthy whiskey, but towards that finish, after those kind of juicier, kind of plummier notes have come through, you will get a little touch, as I've mentioned frequently now, or hopefully you'll get that menthol note towards the end, a little freshness.
I don't get the menthol, but I do get Guide's Mint cookies on the nose. So, which, you know, kind of mentholy, more minty, obviously, than menthol. It's got a bit of a mustiness to it. I get a lot of like red berry fruits on the nose, which for port casks is not all that unusual. And it is quite chocolatey. Curtis, would you like to chime in with your thoughts?
No, you nailed it with your notes there. I would just add there's like a little bit of like orange zesty, candied orange peel kind of note to it to me. Palate, not my thing. It's got that dead port cask over oxidative kind of leathery, cardboardy kind of note to it, but the nose is really, really, really cool.
Yeah. Port casks are controversial, and I'll admit that a lot of times I struggle with them too. But that's a whole other subject we've talked about in other tastings. I mean, I went to Portugal and I was asking around all these quintas, like, do they sell their port casks? And most of them don't, because they use the casks to exhaustion. But these are those are more tawny port casks as opposed to ruby port casks, which is the difference. Anyway, Harmony, your thoughts?
It's big and chocolatey and a little nutty with the orange. Like, I agree with everything you're saying, but not my favorite in the lineup so far, which is surprising because I love chocolate so much. But no, not my favorite. But time and place, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't move beyond this one without acknowledging something that's crazy nowadays. Glenmorangie actually took the age statement up on this whiskey. That's like unprecedented. Who does that?
It was much, as we mentioned about the Lasanta earlier on. When we made the change, a lot of people didn't like it. And they were like, I preferred it as a 12-year-old. Which was, I mean, part of the issue that we had with the Quinta Ruban itself was the vast majority of what was in the 12-year-old was already 14 years old. And it was easier for us to make a 14-year-old much more consistent in terms of flavor that way, rather than having, you know, some, you know, younger, maybe more kind of supercharged whiskies. And now I would say that more people do enjoy it. I know that all three of you have just been dunking on the Quinta Ruban here just now, but I like it, even if it is musty, leathery cardboard. Some people have a flavor for that. And you know, my impoverished youth meant that some meals were just dusty cardboard and leather. We didn't all.
Is that a Tesco?
Grow up with deep and delicious for dinner every evening.
Hey, and Rue, how bad can a 5'10" white guy dunking be? I mean, that's not a really hard dunking.
But I would say that for Glenmorangie, we always try to do what's best for the whiskey. So whether it's taking an age statement off or increasing the age statement, you know, we didn't suddenly put the price up by $20 just because it was 2 years older. So yeah, we try to do we always try to do our best by the whiskey at the end of the day.
We were telling people it was bonus years with no extra charge for it because we literally did have
Exactly, get 2 years free.
same price.
Get 2 years for free.
And it's 46%. So there you go. You know,
This is one where Kurt, I think he'd be like, you know what, if you watered it down a little bit, I think it would taste better. It'd be less of that musty cardboard.
So Rory, in Kurt's defense, this used to be one of my favorites in the lineup. Like I actually quite liked, and it was nothing to do with the 12 years of age. I think it's just batch to batch, you know, some are going to be better than others. It's inevitable. I know distilleries are always trying to make things exactly the same, but it's a physical impossibility. They can get it close, but they can't get it to be perfect. And I would take it as a win that like the 18 and the Lasanta tonight for two of us are showing the best they have in the like roughly 20 years we've been drinking whiskey. So that's a win.
They're not all going to be 100%, you know, and ultimately there'll be someone here tonight who was like, you know what, I love that Quinta Ruban, you know.
There will be.
Andrew and Kurt be damned, Harmony as well to a lesser extent, but for sure. That'll be me when I'm writing an email tomorrow, like, damn you, Andrew.
There's 8 whiskeys here. There's not one I'm not finishing tonight, though. So that's the thing. We do have to pick something that's going to sit lower than the others, right? That's all it comes down to. Because I'm with Andrew on this. There's a couple tonight that have absolutely blown me away with their positioning at this point, that I think are punching way above what they ever have. And then the vintages, I don't have to say anymore. We'll talk about those, I'm sure, before everybody's.
All right. Tale of Forest. Let's get there.
Let's get there. So Tale of Forest is part of a Tale of series. We've had a Tale of Cake, a Tale of Winter, and here a Tale of Forest. We had, a few years back, we had the private edition series, and it had started with the Lasanta PX, the first time we used the Pedro Jimenez sherry, and that eventually led to the introduction of Pedro Jimenez sherry into the Lasanta. And we finished there with, what did we finish with? It was either one where it was the yeast specifically. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
Oh, the Two Sail?
I think it was the Two Sail. I want to say it was the Two Sail, but
Come on, Jeff. Fact check. Jeff, what was the last Glenmorangie private collection release? You can find this information.
But it's always an opportunity for Dr. Bell and the Whiskey Creation team to really push in new directions. And I would love to see, I know it takes time because, you know, we don't make whiskey overnight. I would love to see, you know, maybe in 10 years time, if we do start to see some of the impacts of those experiments where we see maybe more of an impact from things like yeast selection and all the funny little things that we've done over the years. So with this specific one, and this one is really quite interesting.
It's Alta. Alta was the final one.
The Alta, okay. For this particular one, for Tale of Forest, Dr. Bell had, I think he actually had to negotiate with the SWA as to what he was allowed to do. He wanted to do an experiment with botanicals. And the SWA, for anyone not aware, is the Scotch Whisky Association. And the SWA have wrapped Glenmorangie and Ardbeg over the knuckles in the past. Some of it to do with aging conventions. You know, we had an Ardbeg called Roller Coaster, where we stated exactly what percentage came from what year on the back of the label, but we were told that was not allowed. To give people a false idea of the age of the whiskey, which, considering we had a decimal point how old each segment was. I couldn't see how that was the case, but they basically make the rules on what is allowed to be called Scotch. And Dr. Bell got, I think, all the way up to the rule here with respect to the kilning, with the drying of the barley. So in the whiskey making process, I know all of you are fully aware of how it works. One of the big differences between, say, Glenmorangie and Ardbeg is that at Ardbeg, we dry our barley with peat and peat smoke. And at Glenmorangie, they're just using hot air. So you get much more of those biscuity, malty cereal notes at Glenmorangie, and at Ardbeg, you get much more smoky, heavy, oily notes from the peat. So here, what was done was that they actually used botanicals during the kilning process. So some juniper berries, birchwood, and heather, three things that are all native to Scotland. And I think part of the reason that the SWA accepted this was because, one, they're all native to Scotland, and back in the day, there were, recipes and things found which stated that, people would use this sort of thing during the kilning process. So in a way, it's harkening back to how whiskey was made a long time ago. So bringing in a new opportunity, I suppose, to bring in flavor into a Scotch in the same way that, having peat and burning peat and peat smoke will bring the flavor all the way through the process to the very, very final product that touches your lips. Here, the same is true. So some of those more aromatic elements, some of those more kind of like floral and herbal elements are introduced at this point in the process, and they will come through all the way through to the finish. And it has, given, quite an interesting flavor, and resulted in quite an interesting Scotch. And this is the one where I'm most interested in seeing what other people's opinions are. Some of these experiments can be quite divisive. Some people love them. Some people are like, oh. But I do think that there's certainly it's always worth trying, for these experiments and so on. So in terms of flavor, you should have quite a kind of rich, I wouldn't say woody, but you might get kind of like a tiny aromatic-y, incensey, almost kind of notes. I wouldn't say a gin-like botanical note, but more floral elements, kind of maybe juniper or coriander. You will still have a lot of those traditional Glenmorangie notes. You also have those kind of fruity and cereal notes. But we will have a bit more of that herbal, that eucalyptus maybe coming through. Maybe a touch almost of like anise and things there. But how are people finding it?
There's something in this that's making me think of mezcal. And it might be those kind of tiny sappy tones coming through, some of those vegetal herbal notes, but it's kind of like, I don't know, a love child between Glenmorangie and some wild mezcal from Oaxaca.
Is that a vote of confidence, or is that like
I love mezcal. I just came back from Oaxaca with a bunch of bottles of mezcal, so I'm all over it. Harmony, I think it's your turn. I let Kurt go first last time. What do you think about this?
It's good. I remember it somewhat differently. I don't know if it's like all that lingering chocolate from the port cask previously. But the more I like move it around, it kind of brightens up a little bit. But as a fan of gin, and without trying to like copyright anyone who may have said it, it's like a gin ski. It's like a gin whiskey, and it's really refreshing. But I feel like I would have to be in the mood to drink this. It wouldn't just be like I want scotch, grab a bottle. Like this is a specific mood drink.
But for gin, like more like a kind of like a pineier gin, like I forget what it is. St. George Distillery in California, they do their I forget what the specific gin's called, but it's a very earthy kind of piney style of gin.
Like an Old Tom,
It's not an Old
or
Tom.
London Dry, but
Yeah,
like,
it's
yeah,
not-
it's
it's something
it's
different.
pretty cool. I remember the first time Cam poured this for me, and I was like, I have no idea what to expect, but it has botanicals and I like gin. And then I was like, it's neither gin nor whiskey, but it's still good. Terroir gin. Yeah.
Kurt, thoughts?
Oh, sorry, let me just let Jess in. I think we lost that a
Yeah.
little bit. So when this arrived, I kind of wanted to be mad at it just for the concept, but we cracked it open and Sean and I just kind of looked at each other and we were like, okay, it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but it's really well done. Like it's integrated to the right degree. Nothing's too heavy-handed in it. It actually kind of works. And I love Jeff's comment earlier about like the closest we'll see to a peated. And I liked Andrew's comment about the mezcal. Because the nose is a little bit shy. You do get a little bit of that agave mezcal kind of note. I get like cola and a lot of citrus zest, like skins of lemon, lime, orange, etc. But the palate's got a little bit of those phenols. Rory mentioned anise or fennel or something that's got those kind of tones to it, and a little bit of like a rubber or black licorice that I typically get in those phenol notes from heavily peated whiskeys. I think this is a really cool experiment, one that I actually dig and didn't expect to.
Trying to comment on both the chat and in real life, but we did do actually a peated, and this is why I'm saying that these experiments that we do have effects in the future. They do inform our whiskey making. So it was the second private edition, the Finalta, was done based on a 1920s Glenmorangie whiskey recipe. And I remember even back then tasting it, and it did have some of those kind of piney notes. And I do think that Glenmorangie, if you do introduce a bit of smoke into the mix, it does readily kind of take on a more kind of aromatic flavor. But we now have in duty free a 16-year-old called the Tribute, and it's done with a very mildly peated Glenmorangie spirit base. So, you know, people will often complain and say, "Oh, I love that whiskey you did 7 years ago, and now I can't get it anymore." But you know, if enough people said that they loved it, we'll probably try to bring it into our whiskey making in the future. It's in the duty free everywhere. So I know this one has been sold into Canada because I unfortunately am part of the process of getting it listed into the stores. I know that people think that when you stop being a brand ambassador, it's like, oh, his job must be so fun now. And mainly it's just me looking at spreadsheets and trying to ensure that whiskey can come to Canada. Most of my job is trying to deal with things like customs and liquor boards and ensuring that people can get whiskey, unfortunately.
Yeah, fun times, Rory. Well, back when things were a little simpler, that first edition, the Sonalta, I'm sure you remember Doug Ward, who used to be
of course.
Great dude. Anyway, Doug's like, Andrew, we've got this one-off Glenmorangie. I'm not sure what to do with it, so I'm thinking I'll just give it to you as an exclusive. And it was like, I think it was $75 a bottle, and I was like, I was a little nervous about it because this is probably late 2000s. But I was like, sure, we'll take it. It was good. It was a huge hit. We sold out of it. And then he kept getting additional allocations of it from other parts of the world. And so we would be like, we're down to like 10 bottles, and people would panic. And then 6 months later, we'd get another 300 bottles. And this farce went on for almost 3 years, where people would be like, you keep saying it's going to be sold out, and then you get more of it. Like, but I was interested to hear you say that Sonalta influenced the change in direction with the Lasanta, because before you mentioned that, when we were trying it earlier, I actually thought, wow, this is really sweet style sherry. I wonder if there's more PX in this than there used to be, because that's Sonalta. It was such a cool release, and at $75, it was just a steal. But different times.
Of course. I mean, it was what, 13, 14 years ago. I mean, you know, back then you could get a beer for $1. You know, a house was $1,000. It was you know,
You had to walk
different
uphill to
things.
school both ways.
Exactly. Exactly. Last whiskey?
Last whiskey, yeah, Signet.
Man, I would take lower whiskey prices and walk uphill both ways every day for the rest of my life.
We can get there if we change Canada's currency to Bitcoin. You know, we can do
That
many
is
things.
true.
Rory, something makes me think that might actually have the opposite effect of what you're hoping for there.
I mean, I'm not one of these crypto guys, so don't worry.
That was not an
Um,
endorsement of crypto. is
Not
what
at
you're
all. Not at all. I'm just glad that people are no longer doing these, you know, non-fungible tokens of whiskey releases. Put it that way. The Signet then is our final whiskey, and I think it's a great one to end on. Signet means a couple of different things. If anyone's ever been lucky enough to go to Glenmorangie, if you go a little bit away from the distillery, you can find a standing stone at Cadball, the Cadball Stone, and fully taking up an entire 1/3 of the standing stone is this very ornately carved, kind of flowing knotwork arranged in this square. And this is the Signet. It's a symbol of Glenmorangie. It features on all of our bottles. And I like to think of it as a kind of ancient symbol of the care, the attention, and I would suppose the skill, you know, that goes into making whiskey. The people who originally inhabited this part of Scotland were the Picts. It wasn't the Celts, it was the Picts. There's not a huge amount known about their civilization, stretched from northern Scotland all the way down to Hadrian's Wall. There we have the beautiful Signet, both the bottle and the symbol itself. It's not, as we would say here in Quebec, Signet. Always makes me laugh when I do a tasting and people are like, oh, le Signet, c'est le meilleur. Oh, c'est très bien. And I'm like, Signet.
Well, Rory, as an Anglophone, are you allowed to correct French people in Quebec?
Of course, because it's an English word, so that's allowed. That's allowed. But the Picts, you know, they were very technologically advanced for the time. It's just that they didn't have any way of kind of writing down their language. I don't think they'd gotten on to like writing things on animal skins or anything. So the only thing we have are these standing stones and these things that they carved. But you know, the Signet is our kind of nod towards that. So this was originally an experiment done by Dr. Bell in the early 90s, and he was working with very heavily roasted barley. So most of the barley that's used in the whiskey industry, you know, 99% is the same sort of barley you'd use to make like a lager. You know, it's a very pale malt. For the Signet, we're using the sorts of barley you'd use to make a very dark beer, a stout, a porter, and it has a huge impact on the flavor. Now, it's much less efficient to make a whiskey with chocolate malt. You've changed a huge amount of the fermentable sugars into unfermentable sugars, but it does add a lot in terms of the flavor, and those flavors are very much unique. You know, they're very reminiscent of specific beers and so on, but it's not something that's normal to a Scotch. So you will have this, you know, very rich, you know, espresso, dark chocolate notes. It can be, you know, really astringent on the palate. It can be like mouth puckeringly dry. I remember I did once do a tasting at the Victoria Whiskey Festival where I had some of the 100% like chocolate malt whiskey, and I mean it was just so bitter. You know, like imagine a less herbal ferment or something, you know, but like very
Wow.
and
Rory, I need to try this. You're gonna have to give me a sample of this spirit at some point.
well, and I say interestingly, they did do a special release. What the hell did they call it? I think they gave it a dumb name, like something like Signeto, as if it was like an espresso or something. But they did one where they increased the chocolate malt content. It was extra bitter. But for a lot of people, especially people that like other brown spirits, you know, the Signet is, you know, they're just blown away by the quality of the dram. Now it's a non-age statement. You know, the youngest whiskey in there is probably about 17 years, and the oldest whiskies maybe mid to later 20s. There is a lot of different stuff going in there. It's quite a complex maturation. The chocolate malt barley, the spirit that's produced is very strong. And if you're trying to balance that out with Glenmorangie's base spirit, which is not an incredibly rich, it's not richly flavored, it's not very strongly flavored, shall we say. It's not going to overwhelm anything. Then you do need to bring in bourbon cask, sherry cask. You need different ages to try and tame that chocolate malt spirit. And they've done a great job. It's still consistently probably one of our highest rated or most award winning whiskies. The palate to me is probably one of the most complex that we have. You know, it is very different to the two Grand Vintages that we had. In terms of the intensity of what's coming through. The nose is incredibly rich. If you're someone that enjoys coffee or anything of those kind of richer flavors, it's really amazing what you get there. But there is a great balance. There's sweetness to it. There's creaminess. There's vanilla notes. You all have chocolate and toffee and hazelnut. There's kind of a cornucopia of different flavors kind of mixing and swirling in the glass. People always think that it's very dark because the bottle is very dark, but the whiskey itself is, you know, I won't say whiskey colored, but it doesn't come out like tar or anything along those lines.
Well, there's no E150 in it, so we can
No,
we can at least celebrate that.
we're not big caramel guys.
No, which is great. We respect that. We truly do respect that. I will say this about the Signet. And I know this is not a reason to like whiskey, but it still has possibly my favorite stopper on any bottle. I just love the weight of that thing when you pop one off. Like it's cool. It's like a hybrid glass metal thing. But anyway, it's pretty cool. Kurt, I think it's your turn to start us off with some additional thoughts here.
This is an interesting one. The nose to me is still all fruits and pretty notes and lots of orange tones and all that kind of stuff. It's on the palate where you get that like tiramisu, like cinnamon spread, mocha kind of notes and stuff. And then the mid palate turns into Kahlua. It tastes like Kahlua liqueur to me. And that Kahlua note carries all the way to the finish. Really cool. Huge disconnect between nose and palate. And to me, it's kind of like you've got a chocolate coating on your ice cream or something. It's quite cool.
Harmony.
Yeah, this one's growing on me as someone who only started drinking coffee this year. This is kind of cool. This is like drinking coffee a little bit, like smells. It's got that like chocolate espresso kind of note. But that said, it tastes like tiramisu, and I do not like tiramisu even to this day. So it kind of throws me off a little bit. And I don't know if there's just a disconnect in my brain or it's something between the Tale of Forest and this one. But I'm getting this like taste of like those, please don't hate me, you guys. I swear I'm trying. I'm afraid to say it. I'm getting the dried like seaweed, like the flakes that I would dried seaweed wrap.
You mean the seaweed crackers, like those seaweed crackers? Okay, well, that's fine. Harmony,
You're
those are
just
cool.
throwing me
I
off.
like those.
Yeah, I used to feed them to my hamsters.
It's like, it's the snack that I presume has almost no calories.
Yeah.
So you eat it and you're like, I think there was taste there, but I don't think anything came with it.
So
Um,
I'm getting this like disconnect between like tiramisu and like sushi almost. And that's really weird. And I know that's not what you're trying to do here, and I'm sorry. But
I thought you were going to say that after the forest, you were lost in the Signet, but that's not what I think happened there.
no, I'm
Right.
running away from the Signet at this moment.
Okay, we're going for the speed round now, and then we're going to trigger the vote.
Super
So-
speed.
This is all about speed now, not precision, just to see if things have changed and evolved. So Kurt, start us off, Lasanta.
That was beautiful for you guys, wasn't it? Me talking and unmuted. It's showing really well still. Fruity, spicy, slightly perfumey, but in all the right ways. I'm still really digging this one. I'm blown away by this whiskey.
Yeah.
I think after the Signet, I'm struggling a little bit to get it because like the Signet is just so roasted and toasty and robust, but
Yeah.
The nose on it's still great, the palate's still great. Harmony,
Agreed. I like it. It's still fruity. The spices are standing up. It's still got good body. It hasn't changed a lot, but it's opened up and shown it's like its fruitiness just a little bit.
all right. Nectar D'Or.
Take it away, Andrew.
Honeyed, spicy, musty. I don't know. It tastes like you're in a basement level bar in Paris. That's all I got. Maybe that's that mustiness coming through.
The nose is really growing on me. The palate, still not really my thing, but the nose is cool. And there's like a slight, almost mustardy note, like a tanginess to it. It's really, really cool. I really
Like perhaps Grey Poupon.
Perhaps. Is that how you say it? Let's ask the guy in Quebec.
Do we have someone from Quebec here? We got Ruaraidh. That's right. Ruaraidh, is it Grey Poupon? Is that the correct pronunciation?
And sorry, great.
Grey Poupon. Are you not familiar with Grey Poupon?
How do you spell it?
Okay, you know what? The joke's wasted on you. Don't worry. about it.
I'm
Mustard?
sorry.
Spell it
Maybe
mustard.
It's all about a
Mustard.
guy in a Rolls Royce pulling up next to another guy in a Rolls Royce, and they roll down their windows, and it's like, pardon me, but you wouldn't have any Grey Poupon, would you? Which is like presumably a very French mustard, but commercialized.
I'm gonna Google it.
You're gonna need to Google that one, I think. All right, on to the 96. This is still gorgeous. Harmony, your turn.
Gotta hurry up and ship Rory his tasting kit because it might be missing if I pack it. That's my note. It's delicious.
The
I'm
first
loving
one
it.
I finished tonight.
Yeah, I'm just smelling the glass because I have nothing left.
Kurt,
Brilliant. There's a little bit of a saltine note on the top now. It's kind of bringing just a slightly coastal saline sort of thing to it for me. I love this whiskey. I love it a lot. I want a bottle.
oh. All right, 18-year-old.
Oh man, what balance.
Yeah.
No, that nose is incredible. Okay, so we talk about what the best 10 or 12 or 15 or 18 or whatever is on the market. This is kind of jumped a few spots for me. This is one of the best 18s on the market right now, I think.
That's very good. And it's lighter style, but very complex, very layered. It's got a nice mouthfeel to it. Again, I think it needs to be cast strength. That's just me. It's screaming out to be cast strength, but Harmony, thoughts?
Yeah, it wants to be like an independent cast strength 18-year-old.
Maybe we'll get a Westport 18-year-old out here one day.
Maybe like a Kensington Wine Market exclusive 18 cast strength.
That might be a hard sell for
I'm
a
sure.
broader company, but I like where your head's at there, Harmony. So
You just got to put it out in the universe sometimes, Andrew.
But it'll be in the queue right behind our single cask of Ardbeg. We're still waiting.
Right.
those are achievable, but they're that's a whole other thing. Grand Vintage Malt 1997.
Oh, so juicy.
All eat more for me now, like eat more and wine gums.
Lots of fruits. I like that eat more note actually. I kind of want to go to the Signet now and see if I find that on the palate because that seems like something that should be there, but I am getting it here.
I'm really glad you said go to the Signet because now that I've revisited it on the nose, it's beautiful.
I know, like we shouldn't always just go for like the older bottles, but this is definitely in my top 3.
I get like a big Newton chocolate on the Signet now on the nose.
The Signet's crazy to me. This is the most coffee heavy I've ever had it. I've had a lot of batches of Signet over the years. This is really, really singular whiskey. Nothing like it out there.
It's more coffee and less chocolate than I think it used to be.
Agreed.
All right, what about Quinta?
The Quinta has changed a lot in the glass since first visiting it.
Great nose.
The nose is really pretty. I pushed it far away from me originally, but I could nose this for a while. I guess the trick is to have it in your glass for almost 2 hours. Then I like it.
I'm getting like, I don't know, like dried fruits from a burlap sack kind of, and chocolate. It's that musty note that's coming through in there. I am going to chime in on Jeff's comments on the Fig Newtons. They ruined Fig Newtons when they took the trans fats out of them. I said it. I believe it.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong. They're not the same as they used to be.
Be careful what you say there. Kid Rock will shoot up a whole bunch of Fig Newtons if you don't care.
Tale of Forest. Oh man, this is not one of my favorites, but the nose on this is just so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, and I think again, like it's making me think of mezcal. There's kind of these weird notes going off in different directions, and I love that uniqueness of it. This is not like a typical single malt from frankly anybody.
It's cool. Way cooler than I ever expected it to be. I was a cynic. I prejudged it and I was wrong.
Is
It's
much of this?
Sorry,
Is there much of this left in Alberta, or because I know this would have been released last year.
We've still got some in our shop.
Okay.
Whether there's more on top of that or not, that's a question for Cam to answer. But we've still got a little
Shouldn't
bit.
be. No bueno.
No bueno. So we have some. I think this one has been a bit of a sleeper because, yeah, I think it's kind of a weird concept. Like, I think Tale of Cake was what, Tokai casks, so everyone was like, "Ooh, Tokai," and they leapt at it. And I think this one was kind of a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around. But
yeah,
you don't have a lot of it.
Anytime you're doing something that nobody else has done, people are going to go like, yeah. And as I said at the very, very beginning, it's important that distilleries put out whiskies that are pushing the boundaries because it just helps to improve the industry as a whole.
Mhm. That one actually might be my third favorite now. Every time I taste it, it keeps getting better. But anyway, I digress. Signet, last one, final time through, and then I'm going to trigger the vote here.
The palate is so Kahlua. It's crazy. Like I can't get my head around that. And the nose is just soft, pretty tiramisu to me. Neat whiskey. Tiramisu. You know what Signet used to be to me when I was explaining it to customers that wanted something cool, because it always presents so well. It's a beautiful looking bottle, beautiful looking package and everything, right? When you're giving a gift, it looks amazing. But when they're like, what's the whiskey like? If we couldn't pour them a taste in the shop, which we generally can, I told them it was like those Terry's chocolate oranges with that bit of orange, that bit of chocolate and everything. Now it's like a little bit of that with a whole lot of coffee spilled all over.
I think it's now more like, Kurt, it's now more like not burnt, but like fiercely toasted whole wheat bread with Nutella on it with an espresso on the side.
Good notes.
All right, I'm firing up the vote now. If you're sharing a video feed tonight, unfortunately, you only get one vote. I'm going to leave that up for a couple of minutes here to give everybody a chance to vote for their two favorite whiskeys. While we're doing that, while we're letting that play out, Rory, anything you can tell us about what might be coming down the pipeline in the months ahead, either Ardbeg or Glenmorangie? I mean, it's not a secret anymore, thanks to the freedom of information requests in the United States. What
Ardbeg Day obviously is coming up. I believe the official announcement on the whiskey will be coming out. If it's not come out already, it's coming out very shortly. But you'll all have that. If you're an Ardbeg committee member, that'll pop into your inbox in a very short period of time, and you'll find out details about Ardbeg Day. And I'm sure, Andrew, you're aware that you're involved. For Glenmorangie, we have. I'm trying to see if I'm going to have to just check if this one has officially been released, because we do have an interesting second.
It's not a giraffe seasoned cask, is it?
No, we are working on that one, but
like you just get a couple of male giraffes to mark a cask.
Ew.
This one has not officially been released yet, but I will say we have this year, we have a couple of products. We're actually doing something different in Canada this year, where we do have a couple of different products coming to Canada, but some of them are more focused on the West, some of them are more focused on the East. Alberta will get a little bit of everything, so you're not missing out. You know, we wanted people to feel as if they were, you know, maybe getting something a bit more special. I think we have one, two, there's actually three kind of semi-limited editions this year. We obviously have the traditional Tale of. We'll have another a Tale of. We will have, for the first time ever, Glenmorangie's Barrel Select release coming to Canada. Previously, that was an exclusive only for Australia, I think Europe. Actually, even in Europe, I think Australia, UK, and France were the only markets that got that in the past. I managed to squeeze some bottles into Canada, and the other one I can't talk about it yet, but yeah, it's an interesting year for Glenmorangie. We have a couple of interesting things coming out, so yeah.
Interesting. And yeah, with respect to Ardbeg Day, obviously information will come out by email from Ardbeg. It is directed by province, so be aware of that. There have been some changes because they're trying to make sure that committee members get their bottles, and so it's a little different than it used to be, but you'll all find out.
Albertans will only get emails specifically for Alberta. So if you're traveling on Ardbeg Day, we will put an option on ardbeg.com where it'll list Canada-wide for your email. When we're saying a bottle's available, we'll be pointing towards our embassies, as opposed to, you know, getting emails saying like, oh, if you're in Ontario, you can get it at the LCBO today. So, you know, we're not giving you extraneous information you don't want.
Yeah. All right, let's check in on that poll. It looks like everyone who can vote has voted. So I'll share the results here. It looks like for round one, it is a tie between the Grand Vintage Malt 96 and 97, which is fascinating. 18-year-old coming in second. But what I think is fascinating here is no votes for Lasanta, and there's at least one for Nectar D'Or. So read into that what you will. And for second favorites, what have we got here? We have the 96 and the 18 tied, and Quinta Ruban creeping in there with Signet. So I think we're gonna have to call it. It's the 96 followed by the 97 and then the 18. and probably Signet, or is it Nectar D'Or? Probably Signet in fourth. So there you have it. There are the results. Harmony, I'm gonna ask you your two favorites.
I really was surprised by the Lasanta. And for those of you who know me, I vote by bottles that I can actually afford and bring home. So Lasanta will be my first vote. And then the 1996 would be my second vote as like a dream bottle slash,
That Tony might let you bring home someday.
Oh, no, he never let me bring any home, but if I sneak it in, it might be okay.
That's fair.
He's so mad at me. I have cases on the floor open. He's like, what is wrong with you? You have no money. I'm like, oh, but I have whiskey.
Kurt, favorites?
No, 96. You knew that was right in my wheelhouse. I think that was why I was in your guys' wheelhouse too. And then the Glenmo 18, it just blew me away tonight. And then behind that, I'm with everybody else there, that Lasanta was a rock star. It's really cool range. And I love that two of my top three were whiskeys that I've had a billion times and that they showed so much better tonight. That's really cool. You don't get to say that very often in whiskey nowadays. Most of the time you're unfortunately talking about a decline, but in this case, it sounds like we're going in the right direction. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But you, Andrew?
96, my number one, 18, my number two. And if I had to pick a third, I'm going to go for Tale of Forest. I just love the kind of wacky mezcal notes coming off of that. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. And that's also an affordable one. So while it lasts, which is not very long. Ruaraidh, it's 11 p.m. where you are, I believe. I want to say a huge thank you to you for dropping in, for parachuting in last moment to stand in for Bry. We're fortunate to have you. I want to say a big thank you to Cam from Chart and Hobbs, Moët Hennessy in Alberta for helping us out here and for helping us pull this off. Thank you, Cam. Big thank you to Kurt and Harmony for joining me. Big thank you to everybody for tuning in. And yeah, last words, Ruaraidh. Montreal, Nectar D'Or, Bone Marrow Luge, and a McCain Deep and Delicious chocolate cake.
I'd say here's to Canada's next Stanley Cup winning team, the Montreal Canadiens. And it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to be here tonight. I honestly haven't done a tasting like this for a very, very, very long time. So apologies for any roughness around the edges. But it's always lovely to get a chance to talk about Scotch, to share my passion, and to be with such fine folks.
Good to see you back in the game, buddy. It's like Gordie Howe coming out of retirement kind of thing, right?
Yeah, you acquitted yourself well, Ruaraidh. Now, before you forget, look up on Google. Pardon me, but do you have any Grey Poupon?
I did Google it, and I will say your pronunciation is very much as I would have said it myself. Maybe slightly shorter on the final vowel, but yeah. Grey Poupon.
Well, très bien, as they say. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us. Have a great night. Ruaraidh, thanks again. And until next time, everyone.
Have a good evening. Cheers.